You're still the same as you were when you were a kid." As I was cleaning the bathroom, a man came in with a sneering voice. "Did you think it was Felix Richmond and decided to follow him? Turns out cleaning the bathroom is your job? You're still as poor as ever." The man laughed so loudly that it echoed through the bathroom. I turned around at the sound of his voice, but didn't recognize him immediately. However, when I saw his face laughing and making snide remarks, it reminded me of the same scene from my childhood. He was the guy who used to call me poor, poor, and laugh at me when we were kids. Back then, I felt angry, frustrated, and sad. But now, I'm not the same person I was as a child. Even if I'm ridiculed with such childish words, I don't feel frustrated or angry. Because now, I am. My name is Felix Richmond. I recently turned 63. I'm starting to think it's about time for us older folks to step back from the field and pass the torch to the younger generation. But as long as my body is still healthy, I want to keep working on the site. I was one of 3 siblings, with a sister 6 years younger and a brother 8 years younger. Right after I was born, my parents wanted a second child, but they weren't blessed with another baby immediately, despite trying multiple times. When they were about to give up, they finally learned they were expecting a second child, and both my father and mother were overjoyed. I was 5 years old then and didn't understand the meaning, but seeing my parents cry tears of joy made me feel happy too. My mother's happy smile and my father's face, full of love as he touched my mother's belly with a scrunched-up expression of joy. Then, with the unexpected blessing of a third child, my family was undoubtedly at the peak of happiness. We were going to create so many more family memories. I also thought about becoming a good older brother who could be a role model for my sister and brother. However, it happened just before my brother was born. When I was 8 and my sister, Catherine, was 2, my father went shopping at a nearby supermarket by bike in place of my pregnant mother. Even though my father was following the rules and riding his bike, a speeding car couldn't make the turn and crashed into him, throwing him to the ground. Because of that, he never got to see my soon-to-be-born brother's face and left this world. One day, a tragic event visited our ordinary, unchanging daily life. Worried about my father, who was late coming home, I wandered around the room and repeatedly checked outside the window, waiting for him to come back. Just then, the phone rang loudly. My mother, thinking it might be from my father, answered the phone. "Hello," she said in a polite voice. As she spoke on the phone, her expression gradually darkened. "Yes, yes," she repeated, and then there was a few seconds of silence with a serious look on her face. The words my mother said next made my heart skip a beat. "Which hospital is it?" Hearing the word hospital, I turned off the TV and immediately looked at my mother's face. Even my sister, who had been playing alone, sensed something and went to our mother's side while she was on the phone. With a stern look on her face, Mom hung up the phone and left the house in a hurry without saying anything to us. After calling the cab she had prepared, she finally spoke to us. "We're going to the hospital now." That's all Mom said. My little sister tilted her head and said, "Hospital? I don't like pain." Normally, Mom would soothe her, but this time she was so preoccupied she didn't even hear her voice. Feeling a bit scared of this unusual behavior from Mom, I comforted my sister to keep her from fussing. A few minutes later, we got into the cab that had arrived in front of the house, and Mom told the driver the name of the hospital. Since hanging up the phone, Mom's face had been pale. Maybe the baby is coming. That was the only thing that came to my mind at that moment. Mom didn't say a word in the cab. The silence made me even more anxious. Maybe it's not that the baby is coming, but something bad has happened, I finally started to think. With my sister on my lap, I sat next to her. Feeling increasingly scared, I couldn't help but hold Mom's hand. "Mom, why are we going to the hospital? What happened to Dad?" Unable to bear the silence, I asked Mom, but she just smiled faintly and nodded to reassure me without saying anything. Seeing her smile made me think, maybe it's not something bad. We soon arrived at the hospital and entered through an entrance marked emergency room, which was different from usual. Because it was Sunday, the usually crowded lobby was dark and empty. The hospital, which I didn't like much to begin with, scared me even more in that sight. When we went to the emergency desk and mentioned Dad's name, the person who responded guided us to the room where Dad was likely to be. It was a place I had never seen before, usually off limits. Standing in front of that room, Mom suddenly saw something and started crying. I could tell there was something written on the door, but I couldn't read it and didn't understand what kind of room it was or why Mom started crying in front of it. Mom put down my little sister and urged me to hold her hand. Then she reached for the doorknob, but her hand was trembling. Determined, she slowly opened the door, as if in slow motion, and it seemed like she was reluctant to enter the room. As the door opened and the room became visible, I peeked from behind Mom to check inside. The room was dimly lit, with only a bed in the middle and a sofa in the corner. It was a bare and desolate room. Perhaps scared by the dimness, my sister muttered, "Mom," in a small voice. But my mother didn't hear those voices. She was staring at the only bed in the room. Quietly, without making a sound, she walked towards the bed in the middle. My sister and I slowly followed behind her. In the silence, my sister kept whispering "Mom" and tightly held my hand. I squeezed back, trying to comfort her. It wasn't just my sister who was scared, I must have been trembling too. As her older brother, I felt like I had to protect her. As we got closer to the only bed in the room, it seemed like someone was lying there. When we got close enough to see clearly, I realized it was my father. At that moment, my mother clung to my father's body and cried loudly, not caring who saw her. Seeing that, my sister got anxious, started crying softly, let go of my hand, and ran to our mother. She patted our mother's head and said, "Pain, pain, go away." Then she shouted desperately at our father lying on the bed, "Pain, pain, go away." She must have thought our mother was crying because she was hurt. She wasn't wrong. Losing her husband, her heart was in pain. Children might not understand it, but as they grow up, they surely will such a pain. And my sister must have thought our father was lying there because he was in pain too. My mother's heart broke at my sister's actions, and she hugged her tightly. My sister said, "It hurts," but kept patting our mother's head. I ran to my mother and sister's side and held them both tightly. After a while of crying, my mother sat on the couch, staring blankly at the ceiling. My sister, still not understanding, kept calling out, "Daddy, Daddy," to our father who wouldn't open his eyes, saying, "Pain, pain, go away." Seeing this, my mother cried again, held my sister's hand, and pulled her close. Then, looking intently into my eyes and my sister's eyes, she spoke quietly. "Felix, Catherine, listen to what I have to say." Looking seriously into our eyes, my mother continued, "Your father lying on the bed is not breathing anymore. From now on, it's gonna be the four of us, with the baby in my belly." With red, tear-filled eyes, she told us this. My sister Catherine, who was just 2 years old, seemed not to understand what it meant. She must have been confused as to why our father lying on the bed wouldn't respond no matter how many times she called out to him. At 8 years old, I understood what death meant, but I couldn't believe it was my father. I just tightly held my sister Catherine's small hand and looked straight into my mother's eyes. After that, we held the funeral for my father, and my mother, now a widow, had to prepare everything herself, as my father's parents were too old. I remember trying my best to help so my sister wouldn't be a burden to my mother. 2 months after we said goodbye to our father, my mother gave birth to my baby brother without any complications. I was named Felix because I was the firstborn and meant to bring happiness. My brother was named Justin, hoping he would be pure and honest. When Catherine later learned as an adult that she was named after an actress my mother liked from a drama at the time, she naturally pouted and said, "That's so random." At the time, my mother lived far from her parents. Since my father was ill, she didn't go back home after giving birth and took care of Justin at home. My father's parents, who lived nearby, took care of us while my mother was in the hospital, and my grandmother came to help for a week after she was discharged. We managed to get by at first with the savings my father left us. However, it's easy to imagine that living off just those savings would be difficult with 3 small children growing up fast. That's why Mom struggled with childcare and housework without getting enough rest after giving birth. When Justin turned 1, Mom started working outside. Nowadays, it's unimaginable, but she would go deliver newspapers while we were sleeping, come back home to get us ready for daycare or school, and then head to another job. I was 9 years old and had a house key, so I'd come home from school, unlock the door, and wait for Mom, Catherine, and Justin to return. By then, I had learned to wash vegetables and fruits and cut them in pieces. I wasn't allowed to do anything else because it was still dangerous, so Mom would pick up Catherine and Justin from daycare after work and come home. By that time, it was usually past 6 p.m. In the summer, it was still light out, but in the winter, it got dark, and it was a bit scary. I would often open the curtains and check outside, hoping they would come back soon. Mom, who must have been exhausted, always apologized for leaving me alone. "Felix, I'm sorry for making you stay home alone. You must be hungry, right? I'll make dinner soon." "Oh, you prepared those ingredients? Thank you." She would pat my head, and that always made me happy. Despite being tired from work, she would immediately start preparing dinner without resting. She never showed her tired face and always smiled at me. Wanting to help Mom even a little, I would bathe Catherine and Justin after coming back from daycare, even though she didn't ask me to. 3-year-old Catherine would play cheerfully with a water gun, and 1-year-old Justin would splash the water in the tub or scoop it with a cup, playing like it was a water game. I would watch over them to make sure they were safe and play with them. During that time, Mom would make dinner. When we got out of the bath, there was always a delicious-looking dinner on the table. We would sit down together and eat, putting our hands together to say thanks. Playing in the bath with my siblings was probably the time I felt most like a kid. Sometimes, Mom would worry about our long baths and come check on us. That was our usual routine. However, no matter how hard Mom worked, our life never became affluent. One day, I went to school wearing torn socks, and a classmate pointed it out. "You're wearing torn socks. Your family's poor because you don't have a father." That's what my classmate, Mark Nelson, said, making fun of me. I was really upset at that moment. I still haven't forgotten how frustrating it was. I hadn't done anything wrong. It was just that those were the only socks I had that day. I felt like I was being mocked for not having a father, and I got really angry and glared at Mark. Just as I was about to grab him, my father's face flashed in my mind. It reminded me of the time when Catherine was 1 and she played with my favorite pencil. I had taken the pencil away and pushed her hard, making her cry. I felt guilty, but I justified it by thinking it was her fault for using my pencil without asking. But Dad had said to me with a serious face, "Felix, even if you're upset or angry, you have to endure it. The one who strikes first loses. When you can't hold it in, make a fist and count to 5. Calm your heart." I remembered those words during the confrontation with Mark and lowered my raised hand. Seeing that, Mark exaggerated and started mocking me even more. "A kid without a father is so savage. What's wrong? You were about to hit me, weren't you? Savage and a coward too." Mark got even more aggressive when I put my hand down, trying to provoke me into fighting. Our classmates were shouting things like "stop" and "go for it." But I did as my father told me, made a fist and counted to 5 in my head. As my anger started to subside, the teacher, alerted by the commotion, came into the classroom. "What's going on here? Nelson and Richmond, come with me. Everyone else, get ready for class and sit down," the teacher ordered, motioning for Mark and me to follow him out to the hallway. He then asked us what had happened. I just said he had a hole in his sock, and Felix came at me. Before the teacher could ask anything, Mark responded. The teacher listened to his story and sent Mark back to the classroom. "Richmond, is what Nelson said true?" he asked me gently as I looked down. After a moment of silence, I answered honestly. He said my socks were torn and laughed at me for not having a father. I was so upset and angry that I wanted to grab his shirt, but I held back, I admitted, uncertain if the teacher would believe me. The teacher took my hand and said, "Richmond, you did well. You showed great restraint. I'm proud of both your heart and your self-control." When my teacher told me that, I was really happy. I realized then that there were adults who believed in me. That's why I was able to graduate high school without giving up. It's been 11 years since my father passed away, and my mother has been working almost non-stop. So when it came time to decide my future, I decided to start working right after graduation. However, my mother couldn't bear the thought of me sacrificing my future just because of our situation and begged me to go to college. But I knew that it was impossible for my family to afford the tuition for the college. To convince my mother, I said, "Mom, I'll work during the day and go to a night school." My teacher looked into it, and there's a night school where classes start around 5 p.m. Would that be okay with you? Hearing that, my mom couldn't hold back her tears. "I'm sorry, Felix. I'm so sorry. You shouldn't have to do that." That's what she said to me. "Why are you apologizing? Besides, I don't really like studying, so this works out better for me." I said that and smiled. But that wasn't how I really felt. My mother probably knew that too. I was pretty good at studying and wanted to do a job that helped people in the future. I wanted to go to college, study, join clubs, sometimes hang out with friends, and spend my teenage years like my classmates. That's what I thought, but I quickly realized our financial situation wasn't good enough to afford that. Besides, I had a younger sister and brother who had just started elementary school. Since I didn't have many memories with my father, I wanted to let my siblings do what they wanted without having to sacrifice. Thinking that way, I decided to work instead of going to college. I took over my mother's newspaper delivery job and expanded the delivery area. I wanted my mother to get some rest, even just a little, but working right after graduating was really tough. So I did any job I could. I studied for college material desperately in the little time I had. I worked the newspaper route without missing a single day. Sometimes, seeing kids my age laughing and having fun made me intensely jealous. Those two words, teenage youth, something I never got to experience. It was in those moments that I felt the sadness of the life I was born into. Even so, when I came home, my mother greeted me with a smile, and Catherine and Justin were cheerful. I had a life blessed with the important thing called family. Thinking that way, I decided to stop envying others. I attended night school for 3 years without missing a day and earned a college diploma. But that didn't necessarily mean we would move from a poor life to a rich one. Around that time, the person who ran the newspaper delivery business decided to start a cleaning company. They saw my family situation and my hardworking attitude and asked if I would work for them. I eagerly accepted the generous offer, thinking it would help support my family. I thought I could ease my mother's burden a little. Just when I was thinking that, I got a call that my mother had been taken to the hospital. Hearing that, I rushed to the hospital. When I said my mother's name at the reception, I was guided to a room. In the room were the person who called from the company and my mother lying in bed. "Mom," I called out softly, thinking she was just sleeping in bed. But my mom didn't answer. Instead, the person from the company who had accompanied me was crying with red, tear-filled eyes. Seeing that, I immediately realized Mom wasn't breathing anymore. According to the person who came to the hospital, my mom was found collapsed at work, already not breathing. The doctor said that she had likely died from a ruptured blood vessel in her brain. Why did this happen? I was finally going to be able to make things easier for you. I collapsed to my knees on the spot, feeling tears streaming down my face. After a while, I went to pick up my sister and brother and brought them back to the hospital. Catherine, who was in 9th grade, and Justin, who was in 7th grade, understood that Mom had passed away and clung to her body, crying loudly. Seeing them, I made a strong resolve in my heart to protect the two of them. I was anxious about whether I could do it, but we had the house that Dad and Mom left us. There were no savings, but I had a job. I could do it. Wiping away my tears, I decided I wouldn't cry anymore, and I would raise my sister and brother safely. So, don't worry about anything. As I said goodbye to my mom, I made this promise to her. And so began our life with just the three of us siblings. At 21 years old, I was going to support my two siblings. The future seemed full of uncertainties. Still, looking at the photos of Dad and Mom smiling on the family altar motivated me, and I gritted my teeth through my first job. Gradually, I started getting more work requests, and I was able to secure a building maintenance contract. The company, which started with only 5 employees, began to grow larger. I earned enough to support my siblings and even managed to start saving a little. Then, when Catherine turned 17 and was in her 3rd year of high school, she started thinking about her future and said to me, "Hey, Felix." Catherine always spoke to me kindly, knowing I worked tirelessly and kept a cheerful demeanor. "What's up? Need an advance on your allowance?" I joked, but Catherine looked serious. "No, it's not that. I know we don't have much money." As she began stating the obvious, fidgeting without getting to the point, I told her, "You don't need to worry about that. Just do what you want to do." If Dad were alive and in the same situation, he would have said the same thing. "I want to become a doctor. So next year, I want to apply to medical school." I had imagined she would say she wanted to go to a regular university, but hearing her say she wanted to go to medical school made my heart race a bit. "Got it. Starting tomorrow, we're gonna live frugally," Justin interjected from the side. "And what more can we cut back on?" he said, turning off the TV he had been watching. Despite his complaints, he seemed supportive of his sister. Then, taking this chance, Justin began to talk about his own dreams. "I want to become a lawyer." Catherine and I simultaneously looked at Justin's face. "With your grades, that's impossible. You probably just got the idea from some drama or something, right?" Despite saying this, the two of them started their usual bickering. Watching them, I felt happy. Happy that my siblings had clear goals for their future. But remember, you have to pass the SAT on the first try. We can't afford a gap year. 6 years later, I married a woman 2 years younger than me who worked at the same company. She was kind to my siblings, and we lived together in the house my parents had left us. 2 years later, after our first child was born, the company's CEO said something unexpected. The CEO announced he was going to retire, and since he had no children, he decided to hand over the company to me, now 34 years old. Though it was an honor, I was worried if I could manage the company well enough to protect the lives of its employees and their families. Seeing my hesitation, the CEO reassured me, "I've chosen you because I believe in you. This is my decision." With those words, I took over the company from the CEO. 29 years have passed since then. My face now has wrinkles and age spots, and my hair has turned gray. The company has grown significantly, thanks to the support of our employees and business partners. Nowadays, everyone in town knows our company as the cleaning service provider. Our headquarters is in a large building, housing many famous companies. Of course, we handle the maintenance of that building, and I still work on the field. The team that started the company with me has mostly retired and now focuses on training the younger generation and managing the company. I'm the only one who still works on the field. That's why I've been told countless times not to get in the way of the younger workers, but I can't imagine spending my days just sitting in the CEO's office. Moreover, thanks to this job, I was able to send my siblings to college. Catherine, true to the dream she talked about in high school, passed the medical school entrance exam on her first try. Even while studying, she worked part-time to help with the household finances. She became a doctor, married a fellow doctor, and they opened a hospital, contributing to local healthcare with their 3 children. My brother Justin, true to his name, became a lawyer with integrity, helping those in need. Recently, he even appeared on TV as a commentator, making him feel like a distant figure. That's why I'm grateful for being given this job, and as long as I'm able, I want to continue working. That's my way of expressing gratitude to my colleagues and employees who've supported me all these years. I can't forget Mark Nelson, who mocked me in elementary school. Thanks to him, I developed the patience to endure scolding at work and snide remarks from clients. That experience helped me become the president of a company with hundreds of employees. We haven't seen each other since graduating elementary school, but if we ever meet again, I want to thank him. It was during such a time that I reunited with Mark. His voice had aged, and with his protruding belly, gray hair, and numerous age spots on his face, I barely recognized him. However, his sarcastic way of talking and laughing was just like when we were kids. "Could it be you, Felix Richmond?" I was cleaning the restroom in the building when a man called out to me from behind. "Is that you, Mark? Long time, no see." Holding my cleaning tools, I smiled slightly at this unexpected reunion. Poor guy. I guess once a poor person, always a poor person, huh? Mark sneered, looking at me with disdain. Even as an adult, he hasn't changed a bit. He hasn't grown at all. That's what I honestly thought. He's a pitiful guy who can only judge people by their appearances. As a child, I would have lost my temper and tried to grab him. But now, I didn't feel any resentment hearing such words. On the contrary, I felt sorry for Mark, who could only judge people in such a way. Mark, acting like he was superior, continued speaking to my silent self. "I've started a small cleaning company too. I'm technically the president. There's a company called Clean Service in this building, and we're going to sign a franchise contract and start working together. We've become worlds apart, haven't we? Well, if you get kicked out of your current job, I might consider hiring you." Mark spoke confidently. "Is that so? That's impressive," I said, and Mark puffed out his chest even more, looking smug. Then, a man walked in. "Boss, I knew you were here." Mark, sensitive to being called boss, turned to the man who had called him. "I get a bit embarrassed being called boss, but could you talk about the contract one more time?" Mark's attitude changed completely from what he had shown me earlier, nodding his head to the man. The man looked troubled and politely declined. "Mr. Nelson, I'm sorry, but that matter has already been decided." Even though he was told that, Mark didn't back down and grabbed the man's hand, pleading. The man, looking troubled, tried to explain to Mark, but Mark wouldn't accept it. Seeing this, I couldn't stay silent any longer and spoke up. "Mark, you're making him uncomfortable." I leaned in to look at Mark's face and spoke to him. But Mark seemed irritated by my words and brushed me off with his hand. "Shut up. Do you think a janitor like you could understand how I feel?" Mark shouted angrily, almost like he was lashing out. "You're laughing inside, aren't you? Saying you'd sign a contract, but in reality, you're just getting rejected. Don't lump me together with you." He shoved my shoulder hard. Then a man called out, "Hey." As the man tried to step in, I stopped him and began to introduce myself to Mark. I took a business card from my pocket and held it out in front of Mark. "Sorry for the late introduction. I'm Felix Richmond, CEO of Clean Services." Mark's eyes widened in shock as he looked back and forth between the business card and my face. "Dad, do you know this guy?" The man who had been talking to Mark earlier asked. "Dad? CEO, what's going on?" Looking too surprised to understand the situation, Mark kept glancing between me and the man. "He's my eldest son. I'm training him to be the next CEO. If there's been any mishap, I apologize." Maybe because of my kind words, Mark looked at me with pleading eyes and burst into tears. "Then use your power to help my company. I worked so hard to build it, but nothing's going right. I wanted to sign a franchise contract with your company to turn things around." Mark knelt on the bathroom floor, begging me. "I'm sorry, but as you can see, I'm a hands-on CEO. All contract-related work is handled by Alex, so I can't help you." "I'm sorry." Mark was dumbfounded, but when Alex mentioned the regular meeting was about to start, I told him, "Take care," and left. As we walked down the hall toward the conference room, Alex asked me, "Since he's someone you know, was it a mistake to refuse the contract?" Should we have signed it? Alex asked, looking apologetic. No, I don't want to mix personal feelings with work. But why didn't you sign the contract? It's not about getting back at him for something from elementary school. I don't mix personal feelings with work. That's one of the rules I set when I took over this company. I don't want to speak ill of your acquaintance, but his reputation is terrible. The work isn't meticulous, and there's a lot of chit-chat. So I decided to pass this time. Is that okay? Alex was worried about whether it was right to refuse, knowing that I knew Mark. I trust you. So be confident in your decisions. After that, Mark, knowing I was the CEO, came to the office several times, but he never managed to catch me, as I was either on a business trip or in a meeting. A little while later, I heard through the grapevine that he had gone out of business. To be honest, it felt like a weight had lifted off my shoulders, but thanks to him, I gained patience. If we ever met again, I'd like to thank him, though seeing him still the same as he was when we were kids, I found myself at a loss for words. And to my younger self, I'd like to say, you really endured well. In a few decades, the roles will reverse. Maybe that sounds a bit mean, but I've worked hard all this time. I think I can be forgiven for a little bit of bad attitude.